The little girl clung to her father's arm so tightly that her tiny fingers turned white, while every passenger on the luxury flight watched in stunned silence. A sharply dressed CEO stood in the aisle with cold determination burning in her eyes as she pointed directly at the exhausted single father and ordered her security team to remove him immediately. The frightened child buried her face against her dad's shoulder, unable to understand why strangers wanted to separate them. Just as the guards reached for him, the cockpit door opened, and the pilot froze in disbelief. His face lost all color as he whispered the father's name. Within seconds, everything changed, and the truth that followed would leave everyone on that plane questioning how quickly they judged a stranger. Before we continue this unforgettable story, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Spread Love Daily. If you believe kindness, compassion, and second chances can change lives, your support helps us continue bringing stories that remind the world humanity still matters. Morning sunlight poured through the airport windows, painting golden reflections across polished floors as travelers hurried toward their gates with coffee cups, backpacks, and dreams of reaching loved ones. Among them walked Elias Mercer, a quiet 38-year-old widower whose greatest treasure was not the small suitcase he carried but the little girl holding his hand. 8-year-old Nora had spent the last year battling a rare heart condition. She had already endured more hospital rooms, surgeries, and painful treatments than most adults could imagine. Yet despite everything, she still smiled whenever her father squeezed her hand and promised brighter days were coming. Elias had once been a respected aviation engineer, known throughout the industry for solving mechanical problems that others considered impossible. Years earlier, however, tragedy struck when his wife died unexpectedly during a medical emergency. Everything changed overnight. He walked away from his successful career without hesitation to become a full-time father. Every day became centered around hospital visits, medications, therapy appointments, and making sure Nora never felt alone. His savings disappeared one medical bill after another, but he never complained. To him, every sacrifice was worth another day of seeing his daughter laugh. That morning they boarded a first-class flight only because a charitable foundation had upgraded their tickets after learning Nora was traveling to receive experimental treatment that could save her life. Elias felt uncomfortable sitting among wealthy executives wearing expensive suits, but he focused only on keeping Nora calm. She nervously held a small silver wing-shaped pendant that had belonged to her late mother. Whenever she became frightened, she wrapped her fingers around it as though it carried her mother's comforting embrace. Several rows ahead sat Vivian Cross, the celebrated CEO of a billion-dollar technology company. Newspapers described her as brilliant, fearless, and unstoppable. Employees admired her intelligence but feared her ruthless perfectionism. Every minute of her schedule was planned. Every inconvenience was treated as an obstacle to eliminate. She had spent years building an empire by trusting results over emotions, and that habit had followed her into every part of life. As passengers settled into their seats, Nora suddenly began coughing after swallowing water too quickly. Elias gently comforted her while searching his backpack for medication prescribed by her doctor. During the brief commotion, the medicine bottle accidentally rolled into the aisle near Vivian's polished shoes. One of her bodyguards quickly picked it up, suspiciously examining the unfamiliar container before handing it back. Although everything appeared harmless, the interruption irritated the CEO, who believed the father and daughter were creating unnecessary disturbance. Minutes later another misunderstanding unfolded. Nora quietly asked her father if she could look out the window before takeoff. Since her assigned seat was across the aisle, Elias carefully switched places for a moment to comfort her. Unfortunately, one of Vivian's assistants wrongly assumed he was attempting to occupy someone else's premium seat. Without asking questions, complaints spread rapidly among the crew. Vivian watched the situation with growing impatience. She believed rules existed for everyone, regardless of personal circumstances. Instead of seeking an explanation, she confidently instructed airport security accompanying her business delegation to remove the men before departure. To her, he was simply another passenger refusing to follow instructions. The cabin fell silent. Nora's frightened eyes filled with tears as two large security guards approached. Elias calmly stood, refusing to create a scene despite the humiliation burning inside him. Years of caring for a sick child had taught him that anger solved nothing. He quietly gathered his backpack while reassuring Nora with a gentle smile that everything would be all right, even though he had no idea whether they would miss the medical appointment that could determine her future. Passengers looked away awkwardly. Some secretly recorded the confrontation on their phones. Others silently assumed the father must have done something wrong. Few noticed the exhaustion in his face or the hospital wristband still hidden beneath his sleeve. Just before the guards reached him, the cockpit door unexpectedly opened. Captain Adrian Holt, a veteran pilot with more than 25 years of experience, stepped into the aisle after hearing unusual activity before takeoff. He intended only to understand the delay. Instead, his eyes landed on Elias. Time seemed to stop. Adrian stared at the quiet father with growing disbelief before whispering his name almost to himself. The years had changed Elias's appearance, adding gray hairs and tired eyes, but there was no mistake. Nearly 12 years earlier, Adrian had been a young test pilot trapped inside an experimental aircraft suffering catastrophic mechanical failure during a demonstration flight. Engineers on the ground believed the aircraft would crash within minutes. Panic filled the control center until one comm engineer refused to give up. That engineer was Elias Mercer. Working against impossible odds, Elias had identified the mechanical fault and guided Adrian through emergency procedures that no manual had ever described. The damaged aircraft landed safely, saving not only Adrian's life but everyone on board. The incident remained one of aviation's most remarkable recoveries, although Elias had quietly refused awards or public recognition afterward. Captain Adrian walked directly toward him. Every person aboard watched in complete silence. Without hesitation, the veteran pilot shook Elias's hand with both of his own before embracing him. His voice trembled with gratitude as memories returned. He explained to the stunned passengers that the man being removed from the plane was one of the greatest aviation engineers he had ever known and the reason he was alive to fly that day. Adrian then looked toward Nora, instantly recognizing the silver wing pendant. Years ago, Elias's late wife had designed that pendant as a symbol of hope for aviation rescue teams. Adrian still remembered receiving one after surviving the accident. Embarrassment swept across the cabin. Vivian's confident expression slowly disappeared as she realized she had judged an exhausted father without knowing anything about his story. Looking around, she noticed passengers lowering their phones, ashamed of how quickly they had watched another human being face public humiliation. Captain Adrian politely but firmly informed everyone that Elias and Nora were honored guests aboard his flight. He personally helped them return to their seats before kneeling beside Nora, promising they would arrive safely. During the flight, Adrian shared Elias's remarkable history with the crew, who quietly ensured Nora remained comfortable throughout the journey. Flight attendants brought warm blankets, coloring books, and meals prepared with her medical restrictions in mind. For the first time that morning, Nora smiled again. Vivian remained unusually quiet. Hours passed as she reflected on how success had slowly hardened her heart. She remembered growing up in poverty before becoming wealthy and realized she had once understood struggle herself. Somewhere along the way, she had begun measuring people by appearances instead of character. Before landing, she finally walked toward Elias. There was no pride left in her voice, only genuine regret. She sincerely apologized for judging him so quickly and admitted that leadership meant nothing without humility. Elias accepted her apology with quiet grace, explaining that carrying bitterness only made life's burdens heavier. After learning about Nora's medical treatment, Vivian privately contacted her foundation immediately after landing. Within days, the organization agreed to cover every remaining medical expense, arrange transportation for future hospital visits, and provide temporary housing during Nora's recovery. She insisted the assistance remain anonymous, but Adrian eventually told Elias the truth. Months later, Nora's treatment succeeded beyond expectations. Her laughter once again filled parks instead of hospital rooms. Elias eventually returned to aviation, this time mentoring young engineers while continuing to place fatherhood above every professional achievement. Vivian transformed her company's culture, introducing employee support programs inspired by the lesson she had learned aboard that unforgettable flight. Captain Adrian often visited Nora on birthdays, proudly calling her the bravest passenger he had ever flown. Sometimes the greatest heroes never wear uniforms or stand on stages. Sometimes they quietly sacrifice careers, comfort, and recognition simply to keep one small child smiling. Their strength is invisible until someone finally looks beyond appearances. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a heartfelt comment, share it with someone who believes in compassion, and subscribe to Spread Love Daily. Every act of support helps us continue sharing stories that remind people kindness is stronger than judgment. Red Heart Special Request, comment below with the words, "Kindness always wins," if you believe we should never judge someone before knowing their story. As that airplane disappeared into the bright afternoon sky, every passenger carried home something far more valuable than a boarding pass. They carried a reminder that respect costs nothing, compassion changes lives, and sometimes the person the world is ready to push aside is the very person whose quiet courage once saved countless others. In the end, it was not wealth, status, or authority that mattered most. It was the simple decision to see another human being with understanding instead of assumptions, because one moment of kindness can become the beginning of someone else's miracle.